Thank you, Father. As Father said, I'm Jeffrey Parola. I'm the organist here at St. Thomas, for those of you who don't know me. And I provide organ music for the 10:30 a.m. High Mass every Sunday, and also special occasions. So in case you never go to the 10:30, you've probably seen me at some special masses throughout the season. So since I'm a musician, I thought it would be nice to talk about music and spirituality. And basically, the thing about music and spirituality is in some ways we think of those two words as being inherently connected. More often than not, music inspires our spirits to soar. Our spirituality is most deeply expressed in song. But they are two different things. Music is an art form, and even though great art often reflects the best versions of ourselves, art is ultimately a byproduct of our humanity. We tend to over-idealize what art is, and when we do that, we miss the complex connection that art has to our fragile existence as human beings. Yes, art can demonstrate our profound ingenuity. It can encapsulate our sense of wonder and awe of God and His creation. It can express love and the intense emotional experience of life. It can encourage us to aspire to be better versions of ourselves. And because art is so often great, we turn to it to experience greatness within ourselves. But please allow me to say something a little bit controversial. Art can also cause pain. It can coerce us to question our deepest values. It can even manipulate us. It is not perfect, as we are not perfect. It can miss the mark, as we so often miss the mark. Why? Then, after all, what is art? In my mind, art is a mirror. It reflects not only our cultural tastes, but it also shows what we think and adds a palpable psychological dimension that can only be experienced in the experience of art. So let's go back to music. Let's say a history professor wants to offer her students a deeper experience of post-World War II consequence. Country by country, she offers data, facts and figures, details the stories of battles won and lost, offers a survey of the economic impact, provides the tales of struggle and triumph in the aftermath, and so on. But to offer a deeper experience of history, she might consider music. She might begin by using some rock and roll, because it's no mistake that rock and roll arrived after the war. The life is too short, let loose and have fun spirit of that music is a kind of resurrection out of the rubble of war, a sign of immense life and energy that, even in the wake of such tragedy and destruction, could not be extinguished. If anything, this music shows us that after the war, there was an unprecedented, optimistic power inside of people, bursting out into the world with pianos, guitars, drums, and voices. It signaled that we needed to move on, and do so with more fervor and zeal than all the armies of the world did in World War II. It really deepens our sense of the life that people experienced after that incredible tragedy. Or on the other side of the coin, the professor might consider playing post-war serial music. Post-war serial music is a classical type of music. And this technique in music is quite rigorous and procedural, like creating an elaborate, highly complex puzzle that is very difficult to crack for the listener. In fact, it's even hard to listen to, even for some of the most sophisticated listeners among us. It sounds kind of like music written for horror films. And most people would likely characterize the sound as apocalyptic, even if the composer did not intend for the music to leave that impression. So why were composers writing this strange cacophonous music after World War II? It's because of the war. I imagine artists asking themselves, how did this war happen? How did we get to this state of destruction and misery? They looked at their craft, they looked at their field, they looked for the cultural signs inherent in their art. And many of them pointed at Romanticism. They thought of it as a symptom of the collective mindset and attitude that caused people to justify such destructive behavior based on ideals, their own ideals. So what they did in the end was they sought to sterilize music, to take out Romanticism and idealism, and simply make music that's reflective of formulas and equations and numbers and rows and permutation. And oddly enough, this music still manages to sound like the horrors of war. The emotional takeaway for the listener tends to be horror. So by including this kind of music, the professor might add a real psychological dimension to the student's understanding and experience of this era. That's art. It's a mirror, a reflection of who we are. Music and spirituality. Religious or not, all humans are spiritual creatures. And as Christians, we have to believe that. Because without the breath of God first breathed into Adam, we ourselves would not be animated in this present moment. Animated comes from the Latin word anima. I looked up the word anima, and there are some interesting definitions of this word translated into English. Air, breathing, life, soul, spirit, wind, breeze. I think the reason people tend to believe that music is essentially spiritual is because it is animated. And in order for music to come alive, performers must animate it with their breath and their arms and fingers and hands and mouths and feet. Music exists in time, much like the way an organic living organism exists in time. It begins, it proceeds, and it ends. Birth, life, death. A piece of music possesses a character, a kind of personality. It has a seemingly infinite number of subtleties like a person would. Encountering a piece of music is almost like encountering another living being. So it is no wonder that people think of music as being spiritual. But it is a different thing to say that music expresses spirituality. Now, our understanding of spirituality over time has broadened, and even people who consider themselves atheists also profess to be spiritual. But as we are gathered here in this Mass, I will orient the notion of spirituality as being one of faith in God. The Christian faith inherits its musical expression of spirituality from Judaism. For instance, psalm comes from the Greek word psalmoi, which means instrumental music. And as we know, the Psalms are essentially songs intended to be sung. On this foundation was built an immense musical tradition, and some of the greatest musical works in the Western world are direct expressions of Christian spirituality. The liturgical structure of the Catholic Mass has given the world some of the greatest masterpieces of all time, from Renaissance composers like Josquin, Palestrina, and Byrd. There's the Bach B minor Mass, Mozart's Great Mass in C minor, and Beethoven's Missa Solemnis. There are all of those great oratorios, from Handel's Messiah, Bach's Passions, to Mendelssohn's Elijah, and Elgar's The Dream of Gerontius. More often than not, the great composers reveal their unique and very personal faith in their spiritual works. In my experience, musical settings of the Requiem Mass in particular stand out as deep spiritual testimonies made by great artists, since they combine elements of faith and mortality, which are so intrinsically connected. Mozart's heart-wrenching and often tortured Requiem, written by the composer on his deathbed at age 35, seems to be a tragic confrontation between a young man and his premature death. To my ears, It sounds like a spiritual wrestling match between him and God. Johannes Brahms' German Requiem is not actually a Requiem Mass. It uses text from the German Bible, but with no reference to Christian dogma. The reason for this is because Brahms was an agnostic, yet in order to properly grieve his mother's passing, he wrote the Requiem in her memory. And the music mourns and consoles with biblical texts, which offer insight into Brahms' more humanistic, less dogmatic spirituality. Gabriel Fauré's Requiem, which we've done here before, is one of the most gentle in the repertoire. He removes a bit of the fire and brimstone from the text to soften it up a bit, and at the end he adds the In Paradisum from the order of burial to end the piece. This final movement seems to evoke the crystalline bright light of heaven, and it is truly one of the most completely serene moments I know of in music. This shows Fauré's spiritual connection with death is not about fear or anxiety or dread, but it's about hope and release and eternal rest. It seems to me that Fauré believes, or at least is trying to convey, the promise that his Christian faith offers. Of course, these are only a few examples of thousands of works, as spirituality has long been a powerful motivator for artistic expression. So to summarize everything I've said thus far, indeed music is spiritual in the broadest sense of the term, and it can also directly express spirituality as it pertains to one's relationship with God through faith in a very personal way. All of this leads me to talk a bit about a composer that I hold near and dear to my heart, Olivier Messiaen. He was born in 1908 and died in 1992. Messiaen used his music to serve God within the context of his Roman Catholic faith. In addition to being one of the greatest composers of the 20th century, he was also a fine organist, serving at Sainte-Trinité in Paris for 61 years. The titles of his works often refer to a specific spiritual devotion or facet of his faith: The Heavenly Banquet for organ, Hymn of the Holy Sacrament for orchestra, 20 Gazes on the Christ Child for piano, his opera, St. Francis of Assisi, and his final work, Illuminations on the Beyond, for orchestra. When listening to Messiaen, listeners tend to have mixed reactions. Some find his music to be too dissonant, sharp, and thorny, while others find his music to be velvety, rich, and beautiful. I think of his music as being like dark chocolate. You either love it or you hate it, but it's true that it is both bitter and sweet. What drew me into Messiaen's music was not so much the sound, but the mystical dimension. As a Catholic, I understood what Messiaen was after in his music, and the exquisite and strange and unearthly harmonies stung in such a way that I knew that he was trying to express the infinite qualities of God's presence. I feel when listening to Messiaen's music that he's trying to capture the essence of that moment we enter into the presence of God, how simultaneously beautiful and painful that moment must be. Imagine being trapped in a well, cold, dark, and damp. And upon emerging from the well, the sun hits your skin and your eyes at the same time. You feel the sharp sting of the sunlight as it enters your eyes, but the warmth of its rays on your skin embrace you and comforts you. This is the feeling I get from Messiaen's music. It's an expression of imperfection in the presence of perfection. The awe and joy of mere access to the presence of that being. This sums up Messiaen's aesthetic and mission as an artist. In preparation for this sermon, I thought long and hard about what to talk about. And in the most roundabout way, Messiaen led me there. The reason for this is because he wrote a piece early in his career called The Ascension. And seeing as Ascension Thursday just passed, and today's readings deal with the Ascension, I thought it would be great to talk about that piece. But as I delved into this topic, I realized that in order to get to Messiaen, I had to break down the two vital components of his art, music and spirituality. And I dug deeper and realized the message I hoped to offer was actually one of awareness. I think we are all aware of art's power and wisdom, of its ideals and elevated values. But even still, so much great art is overlooked because of reservations based on the superficial, and some art is judged good on those same grounds. An artist like Messiaen suffers from misunderstanding. So many people who value what Messiaen valued most miss the point of his work. And in the end, many don't see the profound spiritual message at the center of every pitch and every rhythm. Perhaps before today, there are some here who knew little to nothing about Messiaen. But that is the beauty of art. It doesn't always reveal all of its cards upon first encounter, or second, or third. Sometimes it takes some effort or some instruction to really get to know a work of art. Some of the most profound spiritual experiences I've had have come through music, and not just by solely listening to music, but by exploring it, knowing what the composer's motivations were, knowing the context of its inception and first production, taking into consideration the ethos of the era in which it was written. And so it is true that while music is not always an expression of spirituality, it certainly has been a profound spiritual vehicle for many composers throughout the centuries. So much of this music is quite profound, and it can help us to deepen our own faith as we listen to it.